After 2 weeks of learning Thai from scratch, I was able to have a 25-minute conversation in Thai. Now imagine that I'd stayed and done it for a year. I would have been very conversationally fluent after 12 months of learning Thai. Hello and welcome back to the Story Learning Podcast. You're in the right place if you're learning languages. My name's Olly Richards and I'm here to answer your questions about language learning based on a lot of years of experience learning languages myself, writing a bunch of books and running StoryLearning.com, where we teach languages through the power of story. Today's question comes from Lucas Gatesco 3148. Says, is it really possible to learn a language in just 12 months? Yes, but of course it is. Now, does that mean it is easy? Does that mean most people do it? No, it doesn't at all. Most people will not learn a language in 12 months, but it is absolutely possible. And you can learn even very difficult languages to a good degree of fluency with the right mindset and the right approach within 12 months. The reason most people don't do it is because A, they don't know how to learn languages, and so B, they waste their time on the wrong things and then get discouraged when it doesn't work. So if you look at our Story Learning Language Difficulty Guide, which I'll put in the description, we have our Tier 1 and Tier 2 languages, which are possible to learn in 6 and 12 months respectively to get to a B2 level, assuming that you really work at it. And by this, I'm talking like 2-3 hours a day of studying plus a lot of immersion around the side. And the reason that it's possible to get to a good level in either 6 or 12 months in those languages, again, with the right amount of study and immersion, and speaking practice, I guess I should say, is that those languages are very, very close to English. So if you are a native English speaker, which, Lucas, you might not be, but the same principle applies, right? Just with different languages. If you're a native English speaker, to learn a language like Italian or Spanish, there is, or Dutch for that matter, there is so much in common between the languages that you don't have to start from scratch in the same way that you would if you were learning a language like Japanese. Now, is it possible to learn Japanese to a very high level in 12 months? Honestly, again, with the right immersion environment, yeah, probably yes. I mean, I've known people who have basically gone to Japan, spent 24 hours a day minus sleeping, immersed in the language, studying in the language, and they get to a really good level at the end. It is one of these things where with the right effort, the right environment, and the right knowledge and the right help, you really can do anything. But I'm gonna stick my neck out and say that with a Tier 1 or 2 language, then it is relatively straightforward to get to a good level of conversational fluency within 12 months. Now, what do I mean by conversational fluency? I suppose this comes back really to the question, is it possible to learn a language in just 12 months? Because the annoying question is, what does it mean to learn a language? And based on what your definition of learn a language is, that kind of changes everything else, right? So when I talk about learning a language, the milestone that I usually talk about is conversational fluency. So this is to the point where you can have a fun, enjoyable, meaningful conversation with someone else in that language, and neither of you are slowing down or catering too much, simplifying what you're talking about to make it easy for the other person, right? This is what I call the pub test. Can you go to a pub, order a pint of Guinness, sit down and have a interesting conversation with someone that you've just met for an hour without either of you two kind of bending over backwards to accommodate the other person? If you can do that, then you are essentially at B2 level, and that for me is conversational fluency. There will be people who say that you can't be said to have learned a language unless you can also read War and Peace and write a paper on nuclear physics and et cetera, et cetera. I think that's nonsense. It's a purist view that has no place, I think, in language learning for most people. Why? Because what are we learning a language for? Right? I don't know about you, but for me, the reason I'm learning a language is because I want to be able to speak with friends, and I want to be able to speak with people I meet, and I want to be able to do that at a level that makes a meaningful difference to my experience, and therefore to my life. Right? This doesn't mean I need to be able to discuss any topic under the sun. It doesn't mean I need to be able to give explicit directions like instructions for changing a pipe under the sink. It doesn't mean any of that stuff. It means I'm able to have a meaningful interaction that leaves both people walking away smiling, grateful for having had the interaction. That's what I mean. And so to get to that point within 6 to 12 months in an easy language is absolutely possible. So what would that look like? So I have a number of video series on my YouTube channel documenting how I learned different languages. And the one that's most relevant for you, I think, is, well, there's two. One is my experience learning Italian. The other is how I learned Thai. Now, the Thai one is more, it's a bit of a, it's a silly project, really. It's a couple of weeks. But after 2 weeks of learning Thai from scratch, I was able to have a 25-minute conversation in Thai. And now, a whole bunch of caveats underneath that statement, but you can go and look at the channel and see where I got to after 2 weeks. And that alone should demonstrate that with the right effort and knowledge and experience, you can achieve something meaningful like that in 2 weeks. Now, the problem with learning something quickly is that you also forget it quickly, and I end up going on to forget 100% of my time. Well, not 100, maybe 90% of it. And I had huge gaps in my knowledge. I couldn't read, I couldn't write. I had virtually no vocabulary beyond the stuff that I basically practiced during those 2 weeks. So I couldn't be considered good at all. But nevertheless, I was able to do all of that stuff in Thai, which is a difficult language after just 2 weeks. So imagine now that I'd done that for 6 months in living in Thailand in a kind of immersion environment, for example. Imagine I'd done that. Now imagine that I'd stayed and done it for a year. I would have been very conversationally fluent after 12 months of learning Thai, including a lot of local knowledge from having interacted with people there in Bangkok where I did it. So that, I think, should be self-evident if you watch that. The other is when I was learning Italian. Now, Italian, obviously, for me, is one of the easier languages because it's very close to English. And I documented this process of learning Italian. And you can see my journey from being I wasn't a complete beginner, but I was, to all intents and purposes, I was a beginner. I had the dual challenge of kind of losing my Spanish and French and Portuguese influence, which is more important than people think because you can have a lot of interference from those languages that you already know. So I had to lose that and learn Italian. And after 3 months, you have a conversation with me talking with my friend Alberto for about 45 minutes in Italian, right? And that's after 3 months. Now, what that process looked like for me was the following. And bear in mind that by this point, I was a very experienced language learner. I knew how these things worked. I knew how I learned languages. So I wasn't doing this from scratch. But I'll tell you what I did. And then to the extent it's useful, that's great. So I spent the first month purely immersed in the language. So I was listening and reading to simple stories in the language. I was listening to dialogues that I found in textbooks. I was listening to my own books of short stories and other books that we created in Italian because I had the translation at that point. And I was doing nothing but listening and reading. I didn't speak a word of Italian. The reason I did that for the first month was because I knew that I just needed to flood my brain with the language to get it to the point where I'd grown accustomed to it, used to the language. So that was part one. Month one, rather. After month one, I went into month two. See, I can count. And what I knew to be true after the first month was that I had a lot of knowledge at this point. I'd become used to the language, the sounds of the language. I had learned a bunch of vocabulary, had some intuition about grammar. And I realized at that point that if I wanted to be able to speak by the end of the 3 months, then what I had to do was do a lot of speaking. And so I arranged to have lessons on a daily basis. It was between 30 to 60 minutes of Italian on a daily basis. So we're getting on Skype. There's no Zoom back then, or Zoom wasn't being used. So I was on Skype and I was speaking Italian for 30 to 60 minutes a day. I would have liked to have done more, but it just wasn't really possible with other things I had going on. So I was speaking for at least an hour a day for most of month two while continuing to do my listening and reading. And that made it so that I could activate the stuff I'd been learning, right? Because it's one thing to be able to comprehend, listen and read. It's another thing to be able to actually output that stuff, speak that stuff. So my only goal for month two was to just do a lot of practice. And this is the bit that so many people miss. They spend all their time studying and they don't realize that speaking fluently is a consequence of speaking a lot, not a precursor, right? So to get good at speaking, you got to speak a lot. I say this so much, I'm sick of hearing myself saying it, but that's what I did, right? So month one was just a lot of immersion. Month two was a lot of speaking. And then in month three, what I did is I started taking lessons so that I could improve my understanding of, in particular, grammar. So I was going through some grammar textbooks, looking at grammar points. I was taking lessons to essentially kind of fix my grammar, point out all the areas that were faulty. And then by the end of those 3 months, I was able to have a really meaningful conversation. And I also went to Venice and filmed a little mini documentary in Venice, which you can watch, which is also quite fun. Maybe we can put a link to that in the description below. So, it should be obvious that it's possible. It's also evident that most people don't do it. I really think that when people fail to achieve this, it's because they don't decide to, really. I think, first of all, it's a decision that you're going to do it. Then it's a commitment and saying, yeah, I'm going to commit to this. And then after that, it's just following through, which, of course, like going to the gym or eating healthy is where most people fall down. It's on the follow through, right? It's not a knowledge gap. It's a behavior problem. So there you go. If you'd like to find out what languages are possible to learn within 6 to 12 months, you should check out my language difficulty guide. We made it recently at StoryLearning. It's fantastic. It's a detailed and nuanced guide to language difficulty. So which languages are easier and harder to learn based on what languages you already speak. It's in 9 tiers, which is different from some of the other language tiers, which only have 5. Inside that, it's going to give you an estimated time for learning each language, how long we think it's going to take if you're consistent with your study. And overall, it's going to help you get an idea of which languages will be easier or quicker for you to learn. So, Lucas, I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you back in the next episode of the podcast.